Welcome back to our city. I'm Mayor Chris Bolwage. A few things going around the city of Elizabeth this week. On Tuesday, May 20th at 5:30 in the evening, a business-to-business networking event will occur. It is sponsored by the Union County Board of Chosen Freeholders and the Union County Workforce Investment Board. Any participant can register online at www.ucnj.org/WIB. It'll be held at the lobby located at 821 Spring Street. Also that evening, the Urban League of Union County will hold their 70th annual membership meeting, and that meeting will be held at the Stephen Sampson Center on Anna Street in our city. On Wednesday, May 21st, the Rotary Club of our city will host a scholarship luncheon at the Garden Restaurant located at 943 McGee Avenue. And that evening, the Greater Elizabeth Chamber of Commerce will also hold a business after-hours social networking event at the lobby on Spring Street. For more information, you can call 355-7600. And on Thursday, May 22nd at 6 o'clock, I will attend the Historic Society's Elizabeth Forum on Broad Street, Commerce and Culture. This event will be held at the Belcher Ogden Mansion, located at 1046 East Jersey Street, and I'm going to be joined in a few minutes by Dr. Paul Mattingly, and we're going to talk about that segment on this evening's show. And also a reminder that Monday, May 26th, City Hall will be closed in observance of the Memorial Day holiday. There will be a ceremony at 11 o'clock in front of City Hall to honor all veterans who have paid the ultimate sacrifice in defending the freedoms that we enjoy in our country. I'm pleased to be joined on this week's show, the president of the Elizabeth Historical Society, Dr. Paul Mattingly. Dr. Mattingly, welcome to the show.
It's good to be here again.
Now, you're the president of the Elizabeth Historical Society, and first of all, what is Broad Street Commerce and Culture?
Well, it's an effort to recreate a neighborhood like we've done over a dozen times before with other neighborhoods, to try to see just who's living there, what's going on there. Broad Street's especially important because at certain points in especially the 20th century, it was the center not only of Elizabeth's commerce, but it was the center of commerce in Union County.
And also 350 years ago, New Jersey, right? Our legislature
Well,
started
it
here.
is. We're participating in the 350th activities, and this will be one of them. But when you look at some of those older maps, Broad Street is just a cow path.
Oh, I could imagine.
The real street is Elizabeth Avenue, because the reason Elizabeth is where it is because of the Arthur Kill, and the Elizabeth Avenue is arguably the oldest street in New Jersey.
So, Dr. Mattingly, you've been involved in historical efforts for a long time here in our city and chronicling neighborhoods. Tell our viewers a little bit about yourself. I know you've been on the show in the past, though.
Well, I'm a practicing historian, and this is kind of a busman's holiday. At New York University, I created a program in public history to train people to do history outside of academia, do documentaries, dramatizations, exhibits. An awful lot of the graduates of that program have gone into many different areas of activity, especially museum work, trying to reconvert static artifacts into something really alive historically.
Is your doctorate in history?
Yes, American history.
It's in American history.
Yeah, right.
So it's fascinating, the culture, the knowledge that you have for all types of American history.
Well, I taught it for 40 years at NYU. You pick up something in the course of that kind of time. And
but in those 40 years
reading,
in teaching it, did you concentrate on the 13 colonies, or was there...
No, I did not.
I'm curious to know.
I started out in the 19th century. My first book was on the 19th century. And I gravitated into urban history. And Manhattan was our laboratory when I was doing the public history. But my latest book is on... the latest published book was on suburbanization. And I have a book coming out on art colonies, and I'm finishing a book on American academic culture.
And do you learn something, or do you just kind of, it's interesting to talk to an author, because do you actually learn something, Dr. Mattingly, or is it a compilation of facts that have been out there for years, and you actually put it out there for people like me to read?
Well, I certainly hope you read it.
Yeah, right.
But,
No, but I'm often curious.
But history is not really about simply amassing facts and reporting them out. The famous history play on Broadway saying that history is just one damn thing after another is really not true. History is actually about interpreting the facts and trying to explore issues that in some cases seem to be intractable, knotty. And one of the issues that we actually set ourselves with the Broad Street is, how did a small city once great, how could it become great again? And that's what we're interviewing people, and we're looking at a lot of information, we're gathering it together, and then we're trying to put it into an interpretive frame so that it becomes very accessible and is very inclusive for all of the residents of the city.
Now, when you talk about Elizabeth Avenue, did George Washington actually go down Elizabeth Avenue, or did he go down East Jersey Street to get to the sloop? Because we had lunch at Boxwood Hall, which was East Jersey Street.
Yes, that's when he was coming for his inauguration.
Right, so how did he get from there to the water?
It's mostly Elizabeth Avenue.
It is.
And but we actually know he stayed at the Red Lion Inn, which is on the site of the current Elizabeth Public Library. We know that his adjutants, that included the future President James Monroe, threw a party for him in December of 1778. He trafficked back and forth here because one of his winter camps was at South Mountain. And in fact, we have correspondence where he's writing to Elias Boudinot on East Jersey saying, why don't you come for the weekend, Or here I come for the weekend. He had to be careful of that because there were
He never told people where he was going
No.
the risk of being captured.
And in fact, a lot of times when he's writing these letters or when people are writing for him, he's not exactly in that place at the time at which the letter says. The whole point was he was running a guerrilla campaign, and the one thing that can't happen is he can't get caught. So he's on the run all the time. And so it's really hard to kind of pin down where he is at any given point in time. But he was in Elizabeth a good deal.
I was just going to say that historically, he was in Elizabeth.
Yes, he was.
More than just to document it.
That's right. And in fact, one of the presenters on Thursday night will be my fellow trustee Ken Ward, who will talk about the significance of Elizabeth in the Revolutionary period, the role of oysters and smugglers. It has everything to do with Elizabeth. Elizabeth was a breadbasket supplying food for the Caribbean, which was where all the money came from for the British and the Spanish Empire, and for an enormous amount of the intercoastal traffic for Americans during the Revolution. One historian estimates that 1/3 of the profits in the colonial period came from smuggling. And the governors can't crack down on it too sharply because it would cut off the money the patriots have for buying British goods. But he's got to cut down on it some so that he can send money to the British investors. So it's a high wire act.
So the Historical Society's work, before we even concentrate on, you did neighborhoods like in North Elizabeth and Peterstown.
Right.
And you chronicled who lived in some of those
We
neighborhoods
did.
and some of the
We did.
immigration
And all of that is
occurred here.
on the website. And we have really concentrated on the origins of the city for the past 4 years. So we've done Bayway, we did Old Elizabethport, we did the Singer neighborhood, and we did Jackson Park last year. Each of those permits you to showcase one or more ethnic groups. Bayway, it's Polish. Old Elizabethport is kind of Slavic and Czech. Jackson Park is Portuguese. Singer is Lithuanian. And so we are able to actually look at the basic routines of people's lives and see how different ethnic and racial traditions contribute to the shape of the city. That's really what our central mission is.
So on Broad Street, as you said earlier, Elizabeth Avenue was the main corridor to the waterfront.
It was.
Which was, at that time, important to commerce.
Very.
Residential.
Yes.
Did they live on Elizabeth Avenue
Yes.
or Broad Street at that time?
I mean, most people who worked in those large industries in Elizabethport walked to work. I mean, you can go down there today and there are no garages, They weren't keeping horses. They later were not keeping cars. They were walking to work. And they weren't taking the trolley either. That was a nickel. So,
Probably couldn't afford it.
well, a nickel bought a beer.
So if you had a choice between a trolley or a beer, you're getting a beer.
Well, there were an awful lot of bars up and down Trumbull Street and boarding houses for transit workers. But the neighborhoods that we have reached...
But that was more towards the middle or late 1800s.
It was.
What about in the 1700s,
Well,
after the spying was all over and people settled here?
in the 30s and 40s, there actually is an Elizabeth Hotel. I have a picture of it, a drawing of it on one of the old maps. And it was a sizable thing, but it was for...
You're talking the 1830s.
I'm to 1830s, yeah. But this is a getaway for Manhattan people, and they stress fresh fish, fresh vegetables. I mean, it's a getaway place. But in the meantime, an awful lot of craftspeople come. And this is the real distinction that we've discovered between, say, Elizabethport and the Broad Street neighborhood. That the Elizabethport neighborhood is for heavy industry that needs access to the water for both bringing materials in and processing large things out. Lumber, shipbuilding, sewing machines, cordage. The Elizabeth Cordage Company was the largest business in town before Singer.
Now, Doctor, are you an Elizabeth guy? Were you born and raised here? No.
I'm not, but my wife's family has been here since the Civil War.
They have?
Yeah.
Okay.
And they've been in the St. Mary's.
St. Mary's area.
Washington Avenue.
So Elizabeth has somewhat of an attraction besides your
Yes,
wife,
it
but I
does,
mean, when you moved here being a historian, the oldness of our city, I guess.
Was very attractive to me. Yeah, it was. And so I kind of backed into this. And a small group started the Historical Society in 1999, December. I'd already been here over 10 years for that time. And I wasn't paying attention a lot to the history of it until then, but it's gotten really quite
You were also working
intense.
much more back then.
I
right?
was,
Yeah,
I was. And now that I'm doing this, I'm wondering how I got it all done when I had a job.
I could imagine. So
But,
you talked about neighborhoods and now Broad Street.
Yeah.
Do you alone have targeted this on behalf of the Historical Society, or is there a committee? How did you pick the neighborhoods to do this?
Usually we rely on knowledge we've discovered in previous research. So previous neighborhoods, we always interview folks when we do this. We take the longest memories we can find, and those people will suggest other people. It sounds erratic and serendipitous, but it is the most efficient. It's been very efficient. They've identified all kinds of people, and we have done over 125 interviews in the course of our 14 years.
And this is all the neighborhoods.
This is all the neighborhoods.
not just Broad Street.
That's right. That's right. Yeah. But we've done every.
I know I
every
participated in a couple of months ago. Years ago, I participated. The neighborhoods and the history of the neighborhood, and talking about the people. For somebody like me who enjoys history, it's a passed down thing too, right? I mean, people are going to get to read this website for years to come.
Well, one of the things we're really trying to do is to make sure that every ethnic and racial group recognizes itself in the history that we write. This is not just about, political elections or military campaigns, the way in which American history was written and taught through the 50s. But something happened in the course of the 60s in which the historical profession and a lot of the other professions discovered that we had left out the bulk of the American public. No children, no families, no women, no labor, no ethnic and racial groups, no immigrants. In the course of the 60s, we got all that back in. And now it's actually become a problem of focus. We have all these new ingredients, and how do you put that together and make it comprehensible? Well, people are working on that now, but it's a more complicated story in which every person can find their story in a way in which they could not before now.
On that note, we're going to take a break, run some commercials, and come back and talk more about your research.
Okay.
Please stay with us with Dr. Paul Mattingly talking about the history of our city.
Play ball!
Imagine you're enjoying your child's baseball game. As hard as it is to believe, one of the 9 children on the field may be abusing prescription drugs and getting them right out of your family's medicine chest. Join the American Medicine Chest Challenge by taking inventory and securing your medicine, safely disposing of your unwanted and expired medicine, and finally, talk to your kids. Visit AmericanMedicineChest.com to find out how.
Never look a howler monkey in the eye.
Fried ants are delicious.
We finished a clinic in a rainstorm.
Really?
That was a confidence builder.
My students actually ended up teaching me.
Yeah. In la keg, a la king.
I think managing a sales team is tough. Try working with 5 different villages. My alarm clock was a rooster. After 2 months, I was ready to quit, but after 2 years, I didn't want to leave.
I didn't know I had it in me.
Turn 2 years of service into a lifetime of experience.
Drugs tell you lies, crack cocaine and weed, LSD, PCP, heroin and ecstasy. Drugs don't make you fail, even land in jail. Future looking awful, then well deny you're saying it. Drugs don't make you die, so don't even try. DUI, suicide, game is over, you're less try. Playing with drugs is no child's game.
Something's not right.
My first symptoms were
constant tingling in my toes.
had double vision.
They said you have multiple sclerosis.
Kind of had to get a grasp on reality.
I had to adapt and change very rapidly.
I had to learn how to drive with my hands. Yeah, that was interesting.
A symptom may cause you not to be able to do that anymore. And at one point, I wasn't able to do any of those.
Since I've been cycling, it's definitely helped my walking.
It's a fantastic opportunity to be working together with a common goal of curing MS, and sharing is the key.
What? We didn't invite alcohol to this party.
Yeah, we don't cheer for beer.
I remember the moment.
I'll never forget that moment.
That moment?
It was a moment that changed my life. I'd been training with my team for months, and now we had been called up for the first time. The real deal. Wildfires were getting dangerously close to homes. At that moment, I got my first taste of just how important the Guard is to my community.
See how the Guard can be an important part of your life at NationalGuard.com.
Welcome back to our city, where I'm joined by Dr. Paul Mattingly, talking about the history of the city of Elizabeth. And Dr. Mattingly, we're talking about Broad Street, which will be the presentation on Thursday. Can you highlight a few of the key points of your research on Broad Street?
Well, 2 points I think are really particularly interesting. The first is that when you do the manuscript census and you see just who actually is living there, you discover that 70 to 80% of the people in the environs of Broad Street are native New Jerseyans or Native Americans, because in 1930 there's a surge of African Americans that settle on what was then Washington Street and now is Dickinson Street. That was a little African American enclave, and there was another one of those on Price Street behind the train station. But for the most part, it's white New Jerseyans who in this area, which is really kind of striking when you realize in the port, it's just the other way around. It's about 80% the Austro-Hungarian Empire. So we're thinking about that, just what difference does that make? Part of the difference is that many of those folks are owners or are employees of the shops on Broad Street. The second point that I think is really interesting is that unlike the commerce in Elizabethport, which is heavy industry, big stuff, and you need the water access, you don't need the water access on Broad Street. These are all craftsmen. It's custom-made stuff, tailoring, food. Silversmiths are aplenty around here. And we have a couple of examples that I have in the program of a spoon that comes from Belcher's collection. It's absolutely exquisite. You know, any museum in this country would kill to have it.
Was it made here?
Yes. Well, no, wait, no. I'm not sure about that. We know it was made by Samuel Casey, who was a Connecticut player. And you know, in those days when you were making something from silver, you had to bring silver dollars to the smith. And so he was melting them down and reshaping. Paul Revere did it too. Samuel Casey got real interested in the coins, and he created his own dies. Shouldn't have done that. So he got caught for counterfeiting.
Oh, he did?
He got caught in Connecticut and Rhode Island. And he was much beloved. His citizens liberated him from jail, and he disappeared going south, heading toward Jersey. So suddenly, this Casey spoon, he has his mark on the back of it. And it's actually on the website if you want to take a look at it. It's one of the most beautiful
What is the
spoons
website, so for our viewers that are listening?
Visit historicalelizabethnj.org.
That's an easy one to remember.
Yeah, it's also, you have it linked on
our
the
website.
city website. So if you can't remember all that, you can go to the city and
go to the link
and hook up.
So your historical research helps our citizens and visitors understand the distinctive role that Elizabeth has played in both New Jersey and the American history.
Right.
And tell us, a man of your learned knowledge, do you learn something when you do this?
Oh yes. I mean, you don't start really learning until you start teaching. And when you start teaching, you learn it in a different way. You may have gone over the same stuff, but you learn it very differently. And it's the same in doing a book or doing a public presentation. If your name is on it and you're going to be really responsible for it, you want to get it right.
Well, I have to ask you this. There's this TV show out that came out a couple of weeks ago, Turn, and it talks about spying in the American Revolution.
Oh.
And it's based in a fictional town.
Uh-huh.
It's on EMC Network, and it's on Sunday nights at 9.
Oh, okay.
And it's based in a fiction. There's 3 more episodes left in this session. It only
Okay.
started about 4 or 5 weeks ago.
Okay.
So it's based in a fictional town in Long Island.
Uh-huh.
And I'm just curious on why Elizabeth could have been that fictional town
certainly
with
could.
the spying that went on here back and forth.
It could be. It could have.
Right?
Yeah. The Tories, everybody had their spy network. I mean, I have a couple of documents from the Marquis de Lafayette, who was talking by letter to Elias Boudinot, who says, I know you really trust this guy, but, and he names him. And he said, but I always suspect that in the bottom of his pocket, there are British coins mixed with French écus. Everybody was double dealing. They were selling to both sides. It's not like there was a loyalty. And knowledge is really crucial. If you look at Washington, the whole time he's in Elizabeth, he's worried about what Admiral Howe is doing with his ships. If his ships are unmoored and they start out, they look like they're going to sea. Are they going down to Virginia? Are they going up to Boston? Are they going up the Hudson? He's got to know. And he also has to know whether or not it's just a surveillance or whether this is a raid for goods. And information is absolutely crucial. Everybody is paying for it. Elias Boudinot is really interesting because it looks like he has a non-job. He's in charge of liaison with the British for trading soldiers, especially officers, back and forth. This was a very lucrative business. People were buying their freedom. But he got to go to Manhattan so he could see what's going on. And he comes back, he has his own spy network. His brother, Elisha, who is married to Lady Smith, who lives at the Belcher Ogden, he is responsible for the same thing, not for all 13 colonies like his brother, but just for Jersey. He has a spy network. Lafayette has a spy network. You know who else has a spy network? The Reverend Caldwell.
Maybe that's why he was shot.
He was shot for that. I mean, people use his murder as, those bad British, those,
But he was a spy.
Yeah. He was able to move between and among congregations. But, the British knew he was trafficking not so much in goods, but in information, which was as valuable as gold.
At that time.
At that time,
So,
actually, still,
yeah, I guess you're right, still. Because the show made it look like Washington had advanced knowledge that Hessians were moving to Trenton and not the British regulars.
Oh.
And so therefore it made it easier
have.
for him to attack Trenton and Princeton.
He may have.
Because they were Hessian regulars. Hessians.
He desperately needed a win.
Right.
Because he was on his back. The Congress wasn't supporting him like they said. It's amazing that he kept his focus, really. It's
so
just involved.
we mentioned earlier the 350th celebration of the city of Elizabeth and the history of our city. Tell us about how you view that.
Well, I'm drawing heavily on my colleague Ken Ward.
Because he's been here for all 350 years?
He's been studying it that long. I never saw anybody that knew how to read a map like he did. But he was a utility executive.
Exactly.
That's why you read before you dig. But Elizabeth was the center of an international commerce and still is. It's the largest container port on the eastern seaboard, and the traffic has tremendous implications for the city. But what it also, you have to combine that always. It's not just corporate America and business America that's doing this. They couldn't be doing any of this without the immigrant populations. And the immigrants who come to Elizabeth are, for the most part, skilled labor. We're not just talking about grunt work and manual labor. These guys are skilled. And because they have these machine skills, they can make anything. So lots of other corporations come here or not related to the original corporations because they know that that labor force is really crucial. So it's this interaction between international commerce and immigrant labor that actually is the heart of what keeps Elizabeth, Elizabeth.
It probably helped us not only sustain ourselves in the 1800s and 1900s, but it's helping us grow into this century.
Absolutely. Well, you're doing your best to cultivate Krakauer and whoever wants to come and have access to the water. I mean, the water is still exceedingly crucial.
So the 350th anniversary in the Society of Planning Events, you're also planning to talk to us about some of the events that the Historical Society does, not only this year, but also in the 350th.
Well, for the 350th, our contribution on Broad Street will be one. We actually, our first one was earlier in November when, well, you came to that too. Ken Ward made this presentation on pirates and smugglers and whatnot. He's doing a reprise on that. He's done this in Westfield and he's about to do it again in Trenton. And it actually gives a whole different picture of the revolution that, you know, is really accessible and sensible. So there's that. We're doing Broad Street, and then I'm joining with the Elizabeth Public Library for a presentation they're doing on, we're doing our part of it July 12th, which is hair, self-esteem, and political reform. Now we get there largely, my part is going to be on civil rights in Elizabeth. And the hair connection is Steve Sampson. You know, he had a barbershop. And he wouldn't cut your hair unless you learned how to use the voting machine.
He did. It's a true story, which is fascinating.
It is.
And we named a center after Steve.
I know you did.
He's been on this show before he passed, naturally, and he's very educational.
I know. Well, I've done an interview with him, which was really very enlightening, and I've got a former councilman to sort of read the Steve Sampson part of the Skill Chapman, who will join me on July 12th.
Dr. Mattingly, I want to thank you for taking the time to join us on the show.
My pleasure. Thanks so
share
much.
And chat about the history of our great city.
Great.
Thank you. For Dr. Paul Mattingly, I'm Chris Bolwage, and we'll see you next week on another edition of Our City.